When you admire the masterpieces of the 19th century, the profound portraits, the warm, rich shadows that give volume and life to European faces, you are looking at one of the most macabre practices in human history. In our last episode, we saw how the pursuit of the perfect light poisoned the masters with lead white. But what about the shadows? To achieve the most coveted, warm, and translucent shade of brown of the era, the art world did not turn to earth or minerals. They turned to human corpses. Welcome back to Ars Historica. Today, we open the paint tubes of Europe's greatest studios to uncover a pigment so literal in its name that many artists refused to believe its origin: mummy brown.
Yes, it was exactly what the name implied. For over 300 years, the shadows in the paintings that hang today in the Louvre and the National Gallery were painted using the crushed flesh, bones, and bandages of ancient Egyptians. To understand how sacred human remains became stationery supplies, we must understand the European obsession with what they called mummia. It began not with art, but with medicine. During the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, a rare natural bitumen found in nature was believed to possess miraculous healing properties. But natural bitumen was scarce. Apothecaries made a tragic mistranslation. They knew Egyptians used resins to embalm their dead. The bizarre conclusion was, if we don't have pure bitumen, let's consume the mummies soaked in it. And so, the systematic looting of Egypt began.
For centuries, wealthy Europeans ate, drank, and rubbed mummy powder on their wounds to cure everything from headaches to ulcers. It was medicinal cannibalism sanctioned by science. But in the 16th century, artists began frequenting apothecaries in search of pigments. Someone, somewhere, took that ground corpse powder and mixed it with linseed oil. The result was magical. Mummy brown wasn't just a color, it was a texture. It was thick, translucent, perfect for the technique of glazing, applying thin layers of transparent color to give depth to shadows and skin. It dried well and had a tone that neither sienna earth nor umber could match. The Egyptian resin fused with dehydrated human flesh created a pigment that glowed in the dark of European studios.
Demand exploded. The mummy trade became so lucrative that when the real tombs began to empty, dishonest merchants started manufacturing fake mummies using the fresh corpses of criminals and beggars in Europe, baking them in ovens with asphalt. But authentic mummies were preferred. It was said that the mummies of pharaohs and high priests made the best paints due to the high quality of the spices and resins used in their embalming. Royal status in life translated into a premium pigment in death. During the 19th century, mummy brown was at its peak. It was the darling of the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, British artists obsessed with romanticism and precise details. Masters like Eugène Delacroix commissioned the pigment regularly in London and Paris.
The most fascinating part of this story is not that they used corpses, but that many artists genuinely did not know what they were using. They thought mummy brown was just an exotic trade name for a mixture of earths, like burnt sienna, until the truth began to leak from the pharmacies. The most dramatic awakening occurred with the famous English painter Edward Burne-Jones. He was having lunch with his friend, fellow artist Alma Tadema. Tadema jokingly mentioned that mummy brown was in fact made from real ancient Egyptian mummies. Burne-Jones refused to believe it. When Tadema confirmed and explained the human grinding process, Burne-Jones was so terrified by the idea that he was staining his canvases with dead pharaohs that he immediately abandoned the table.
He ran to his studio, gathered all his tubes of mummy brown, took them to the garden of his house, and insisted on giving them a proper funeral. He literally buried the paint in the dirt to return the dead to their rest. It was a reality check for the Victorian art world.
Aesthetics had crossed the line of the profane in an undeniable way. Painting a portrait of European nobility using the mortal remains of African nobility from millennia ago began to feel less romantic and more like a terrible curse. Other artists allegedly went even further. The French painter Martin Drolling supposedly acquired the mummified hearts of French monarchs looted during the Revolution, grinding them up to paint the interiors of his scenes.
At the turn of the 20th century, the moral perception regarding archaeology and respect for the dead began to change. But it wasn't ethics that ended Mummy Brown. It was logistics. They simply ran out of mummies. The British Empire and Egyptologists began to regulate excavations and the export of artifacts. The source dried up. In 1964, the famous British paint manufacturer C. Robertson, the last official supplier of the color, ceased production. The company's director stated simply, "We might have a few odd limbs lying around somewhere, but not enough to make any more paint." Today, if you buy a tube of paint named Mummy Brown, don't worry. It is just a synthetic mixture of harmless minerals.
The color survived, but the sacrifice ended. Yet the legacy of this pigment leaves us with one of the greatest and most poetic paradoxes in the history of art. The ancient Egyptians created the mummification process to ensure the immortality of the physical body, so the soul could live forever in its original form. Europeans destroyed that immortality. They crushed and erased the identity of those sacred individuals. But by grinding them into paint and spreading them across the canvases of the world's greatest museums, the 19th century artists inadvertently gave these mummies a new form of eternity.
As long as the art lasts on the walls of the Louvre and around the world, they will still be there, hidden in plain sight, in the warm shadows, immortalized on the canvas. A life destroyed so that another could be painted. This is the true alchemy of art. Thank you for watching Ars Historica. If this dark journey into the secrets of the masters fascinated you, leave a like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments, would you hang a painting in your house knowing it was painted with human remains? Until the next episode.